All right. All right, everyone. Welcome to the New York City Airbnb hosts online meetup. So during coronavirus, we've put together this online weekly meetup series, and the series is going to cover topics to help hosts save their businesses during this time. If you have any topics that you would like to see covered, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll try to see if we can bring in speakers for those for future events. For those of you who just joined, we're going to get started in about 2 or 3 minutes. We're expecting about 70 people on the call, so please make sure to keep your microphones on mute throughout the meetup. If you do have any questions for the speakers, you can type them into the chat box at the bottom. In Zoom, if you go to the bottom center, you should see a box that says chat there. And you should be able to put all your questions in there. So we're going to run through all the speakers. They're each going to get 10 minutes to speak. And then at the end, we'll handle questions. So if you type them there throughout, I'll read them and get off at the end. The event is going to run until 6:30, and we'll do our best to get to all the questions. But if we don't get to any questions, we do have a Facebook group, so you can post your question in the Facebook group after this event. And I'll include the link to that group in the event email. I just saw someone post in the chat that they can't hear me. I think, is anyone else having trouble hearing? If they could just type in the chat if they're having trouble hearing. Just trying to determine. Okay, everyone, a few other people said they're able to hear, so I think it's something on your end. You may be able to dial in from the number instead if you're having an issue with your computer. We're also going to record this meeting, so we'll post a recording in the Facebook group after in case anyone wants a refresher. Cool. I'm just going to go over this one more time because we had a bunch of people also who just joined. Please make sure that you keep your microphones on mute throughout the meetup and put any questions in the chat box. We'll address those at the end with the speaker. There is a lot of people on this call, so we want to avoid everyone talking over each other. Great, so why don't we go ahead and get started. We kind of have the lineup for the event as I mentioned before, but I'll say for those who just joined, we're going to have 2 speakers. They're each going to speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll handle the questions from the chat box at the end. To answer the question that someone just put in the chat box, yes, we are going to record this meetup, and we're going to post it in our Facebook group after. So we'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker, who is Michael Chang. Michael is a partner at TrustBnB, which is a leading provider of furnished rentals in California, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Prior to TrustBnB, Michael was an M&A investment banker at Citigroup and Bank of America Merrill Lynch in New York. And Mike is going to be talking about the SBA loan portion of this meetup. So Mike, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Mike. Everyone, thanks for joining this meeting and spending your afternoon here with me. First off, Mike, thanks for putting this together. I have a few slides that I'll share just to frame the conversation. But of course, none of this is legal advice or financial advice. Please contact your accountant for any specific instructions. What I wanted to share today really was kind of my research into applying for these different programs, particularly the PPP program and the EIDL programs through the SBA. So I'll give a kind of quick overview of both programs, kind of talk you through kind of how I applied for them, where I'm at in the process, some of my friends that already have applied and been approved for their loans, and some of the chatter that I've been hearing from my friends that are still at the banks. And then if there are any questions that happen to kind of answer how I thought about it, and maybe some of it's applicable to your individual situations. With that, Mike, would you mind sharing the presentation?
Yeah, one second. Are you able to see it, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So you go to page 2, Mike. Okay. So I mean, right now, so the first slide. Right now, look, there's just a ton of information out there about these various programs. What I'll say is that it's really a moving target right now. The SBA, the Treasury Department, the banks are all really trying to figure out how best to roll out this program in the fastest way possible. So you're going to see a lot of different information online. And then what I would say is the best thing to do is really try to get in contact with your bank and then really look at the source material on the Treasury and SBA websites. They're going to be really the authoritative source of information for you. I think another key thing I want to mention is that a lot of these banks, especially the national banks, you basically have to be a customer to apply, because they have to comply with your know your customer laws and the bank secrecy laws. So that's why they're not taking kind of anyone that comes in. Bank of America has some of the requirements as well, but generally speaking, that's why some of the larger banks are only limiting this to people that already have a checking account at the bank, so they can process these applications quickly without verifying identity. There are some tricks around that I've heard that works, and I'll kind of talk about that as I kind of finish the presentation. You want to move to the next slide? Okay. So, look, we're all business owners here. Okay, sorry, question. Look, we're all small businesses here. It's, with having no revenue over even a short period of time, it's going to be really tough for everyone to make rent, pay their utilities, keep their staff going. So really, these loans really can provide a lifeline over a few months, and hopefully bridging us to the summer, where hopefully we can get to the right side of the COVID-19 situation. Congress passed the CARES Act about 10 days to 2 weeks ago. $350 billion is earmarked to helping businesses, and particularly the EIDL loans and the PPP loans. So again, we'll talk about the act, we'll talk about the loans, how I applied, and then some of the lessons learned. Mike, next slide, please. So at a high level right now, the individual payments, you get $1,200 for single filers. If you make up to $75,000, if you make more than that, up to $100,000, that's a sliding scale. If you're a joint filer, it's $2,400. If you have a child under 16, that's another $500. One key thing to note is that if you've made more than that in 2019, but this year, if you end up making less, you can still be eligible for that benefit, and that will apply when you file your 2020 returns. So just note that as you get ready to file, as you file your returns for 19 and 2020. But there's really nothing to do for that right now. The checks are supposed to come, I think, around now or next week. So for the people that qualify, obviously, that's a nice boost to, and some nice cash flow that can come in to hopefully cover some expenses. So moving to the loans, the EIDL loan advance. So what is that? Now, there's been a lot of questions and confusions on that. What that is basically the EIDL loan is a loan that Treasury kind of has out there generally for disasters. For this COVID situation specifically, there's a short application online at the SBA website, and there's a link in this link. But basically what they were saying was that you can get $10,000 per applicant if you fill out this form. Today, and obviously there's been a lot of demand for that loan, but today some new guidance has come out from Treasury saying that you can only get $1,000 per employee versus $10,000 for any business. So that's obviously kind of a very important point. If you only are like 1 or 2 employees, if it's just you, an LLC, or a partner, or you're doing it with your spouse, you can really only be eligible for $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000. Obviously, if it's a bigger operation, you can kind of go up to 10,000. Go up to 10 employees and $10,000. Another important part of this is it doesn't have to be repaid. So, you go get the loan, you apply for it, and hopefully, you get approved and funded. And then you can apply for the larger EIDL loan, which you can do after you apply for this loan and the PPP loan. Mike, next slide. So the PPP loan, what is that? It really is Congress's attempt to help you plug payroll for 2 months or for the 8 weeks until the end of June. So it really is you take your payroll, so really only your W-2 payroll, and you divide that by 12, multiply by 2.5, and then that loan is the amount that that you're eligible. That loan can be forgiven if you use it for payroll over this 8-week period. 75% of that has to be used for payroll. And then, obviously that has to be documented, but the other 25% can be used for utilities and rent. For loan forgiveness, there's very specific requirements on keeping headcount and salary levels for employees. So obviously that, be very careful in keeping the right records so that you can apply to the bank, to the lending institution, so to the bank that gave you the loan to get the loan forgiveness. So it's not an automatic forgiveness. You have to apply and be approved for the loan forgiveness. But even if you don't get the loan, it's a pretty attractive loan. It's only 1% interest rate. You don't have to pay for the first, I believe, 6 or 12 months, and you have 2 years to pay it off. So, I mean, it's pretty cheap money, and it's not collateralized. You don't have to personally guarantee it. So, definitely a loan that that you should apply for. And then I won't spend too much time on the regular EIDL loan, but that's the regular disaster loan that is applicable to, when the president declares a disaster area. So whether it be floods or hurricanes, up to $2 million available. There's a lot more paperwork involved. I can talk about that a little bit because I applied for that as well. The funding is going to be a lot slower than the PPP program. The interest rates are higher. There's a personal guarantee. They're going to look at all your assets, and the loan's not forgivable. But it's still, worthwhile to get if you don't have access to other financing. It's still worthwhile. Another thing to note is that these aren't mutually exclusive. So you should definitely apply for all the loans now, to the extent that you get funded for one or the other or both. That's fine. They're not mutually exclusive, as long as you can document that those expenses are used, those loan proceeds are used for different expenses. Then you can use that to get forgiveness on that PPP loan. Mike, if you want to next slide. Okay. So some of the key lessons, right? Really apply as soon as possible. It's really a first come, first serve type program. The first applications I saw that went out for the EIDL, I applied on the 30th when it first came out. So that 10K advance for the PPP loan. Chase came out, I think they were first out of the national banks that came out on the 3rd, April 3rd, excuse me. And obviously a lot of the other banks have come out with that as well. So, if you haven't applied, definitely apply. It's first come, first serve. Once the $350 billion runs out, then the banks won't be able to originate any more of these loans. Congress there's been a lot of noise over the last 48 hours about adding another $250 billion to the program. And if you look at this, a lot more funding is going to come to this program. So definitely get get a place in line, make sure you have all your documents, and then apply, because you never know, they might add more funding afterwards, and maybe you don't get approved now, but this program is active through the end of June, so you'll still be, if they add more funds to it, you still might be able to get it, maybe not now, but maybe in May. I think one thing really critical is getting a banker on the phone and having all your paperwork ready. So I'll just kind of walk through very quickly, and Mike, please let me know the time check if I'm running over, please.
Yeah, we'll do. You're good.
So I applied for Chase, I applied on the afternoon Friday the 3rd, so around 2 o'clock, and I think the application came around noon. I got a call from the banker on Monday around 5 o'clock. So they're really utilizing all their staff to be able to process these loans. The person that processed my loan, she was more on the credit card side. So I think they're trying to find everyone they can to help underwrite and process these loans. I spent an hour on the phone with her. She asked for my business tax returns, my payroll records, had to sign a promissory note, and there were a couple of the Chase specific forms they asked me to fill out. It took around 45 minutes to finish everything, and her guidance was that if everything was okay, I would hear back in 24 hours. I haven't heard back, and then once approved, funding would be within 3 days. So that's kind of the guidance that she had given me. I have a separate business entity through TD Bank. TD Bank, they opened the application on Monday as opposed to Friday. So 2 days ago, I applied. I haven't heard anything back from TD Bank. Bank of America, and just to wrap up the point, Bank of America, they have a lot more stringent requirements. You actually have to be a borrower, not just have an account at the bank. So that's been a difficulty for a lot of people. Wells Fargo, which I don't bank I've heard that they've actually stopped taking applications because they've hit their limit. I've also tried applying at Lendio, so it's one of these kind of online business loan providers. So they're taking applications, like Cabbage is also taking applications. They're basically acting as an agent. They're going to take all your information. They're going to find a bank that's going to be able to file these loans on their behalf. And the way that they're making money is they take 1% from the bank. So that's why they're not charging you. But that's another way to go if you don't have access at your regular banking institution. Is some of these online banks are willing to act as the agent and push your paperwork forward. One of the things that I've discovered is that if you go to a smaller community bank, there's one in Philadelphia in particular called Republic Bank. You have to be either in New York, Jersey, or Philadelphia to be able to open an account, but they'll do an account online pretty quickly and apply for you. And I've read that they've been able to fund people like within 48 hours. So if you're in those areas, obviously, that's a good, that could be a bank to apply at, but look at some of your community banks in your geography. They'll be able to act faster than some of the national banks. And I'll end with, I have a friend who has a catering business. He actually received approval for his loan, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about kind of what he did. He applied on the 3rd as well. So that's on Friday. He got a call from Chase on Sunday, kind of did everything that I just talked about. So he filed the 941s, the W-3s, his January payroll, his payroll for the year. And he just got the email approving the loan this afternoon. And then they said that they would get funding within 72 hours. So that's kind of a live example of someone actually that's gone through the PPP process. So it's definitely doable, but just having all your paperwork ready is, I think that's really the key point is apply, have all your paperwork ready. Do not let that banker off the phone until they have everything that they need so that they can put it in their system. Because for them, it's actually, they have to get all the paperwork. They need to get someone with their underwriting department to approve it. And then someone needs to actually manually go into the SBA system and input all your information on there. So it's not automated. It's actually pretty manual after the banks have approved the loan and putting it into the SBA for them to fund the loan. So that's really where a lot of the hiccup is right now is that part of the process is not automated. On the next slide, I added a few links that are helpful. One part is there's been a lot of questions on contractors versus sole proprietors. If you're if you're running this business as a sole proprietor, you can apply on the 3rd, but as a contractor, you have to wait until the 10th. So there's some specific rules there that apply. So, I would encourage people to kind of take a look at that link and understand kind of where they sit within those two types of business entities, so they can figure out where they, what's the best process for them to be able to get some of these loans. And then my contact information is below. We'll send a link out with this presentation and happy to answer any additional questions. I do see some questions in the chat, but we're going to defer that to the end of the call or until we finish with the next presentation, and we can address some of these calls. Or some of these questions, excuse me.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Mike. So as Mike said, I will send out that presentation at the end so everyone's able to review it. And at the end of this call, we'll take any questions that we can regarding the SBA loans. So our next speaker is Anurag Verma, who is the co-founder of Price Labs, which he founded 5 years ago to bring revenue management automation prevalent in airlines and hotels into the vacation and short-term rental industry. Before Price Labs, he was designing and improving revenue management algorithms and systems at United Airlines in Chicago, while working closely with revenue managers and data scientists within the company. He has a PhD in operations research and loves all things numbers. So I'll let Anurag take over from here.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you everyone for joining in. What I want to do is to take up 10 to 15 minutes of your time and really dive into some of the data that we are seeing, and I'm going to break it up into two parts. At first, I'm going to speak more about general booking trends around the world, what has happened since COVID-19 hit, and then also dive into New York specific data to understand if there is anything different there. And then also point to some resources where you can monitor this data live so that as things changed, you're sort of on top of things. So with that in mind, the first thing that I wanted to share was essentially the first bullet here. I mean, if there are three takeaways to take out of this, these would be those. And the first one is not news to anyone, and it is that new bookings are down 80%. So we are seeing this pretty much across markets. What I'm not speaking about in this presentation is cancellations. I think we have all had to deal with those. What we are trying to focus now on is if you're still open for business and if you are taking guests and your operations allow for it, then what kind of bookings are still coming in and what can you do to try and get some income out of those so that you can make it through the next few months. So with that in mind, like new bookings are down 80%, but what we are seeing is that new bookings are still happening. They are not down to zero. So there is still some demand. And then we really try to figure out what that demand looks like. And you'll see that average length of stay has increased, and we have seen this across multiple data sources. And then the booking lead time is down 50%. Lead time is what we call, if somebody books a stay today for a check-in a week from now, 7 days from now, then the lead time is 7 nights. If they book it for tomorrow night, then the lead time is 1 night, and so on. So we are seeing that people are not booking farther out in future. They're really booking for like immediate and essential travel, or not even travel, accommodation needs in some ways. So the first sort of chart that I want to look at is each day here is a booking day. So, and we are trying to track across the world how many bookings are coming in on each booking day. And what we are seeing is towards the end of March and early April, that number, what used to happen, like the number of bookings that used to come in Feb, that number has dropped to almost 20% of what it used to be. If you look at this chart, the peaks here are midweek, and then the bottoms, the troughs are the weekends. So we generally used to see that a lot more people book midweek. Now, I mean, those trends are almost irrelevant. So few people are booking that you won't notice those trends almost. The next one is showing the same chart as before, but it's only focusing on 15 to 21 days stays, 22 to 30, and 31 to 60. So essentially, not short-term stays anymore, but these are what we classify as mid-term stays. Now, we are seeing that these are actually, and this is looking at the entire world right now, but these have been increasing. So not just that their proportion of total bookings has increased, but in absolute terms themselves, longer stays have increased. And there are multiple reasons for this. And we can all try and figure out what those are. A lot of times it's medical workers who need a stay away from their family. A lot of times it's people who are stuck in a city that they can't get out of anymore, so they are booking longer stays. But whatever the reason, these are the bookings that are happening a little more than normal now. The third big trend we are seeing is the lead time. So again, this is the exact same chart as the first one we saw, where we were tracking total number of bookings, and you'll see that the total numbers have come down. Back in February, a lot of people were booking stays that were, this is purple, which is 60 to 180. This is not purple, I'm sorry, magenta, which is 61 to 180 days, so 2 to 6 months out. Orange, which was 1 to 2 months out, and the blues were 7 to 30 days out. Now, off late, what we are seeing is those farther out bookings have just disappeared, which essentially goes on to say that nobody knows what's going to happen and when this is going to subside. So people aren't booking stays for summer that they would have usually started booking already. That's not to say that summer will not see bookings. That's just to say people are not seeing it right now. What we are seeing people still book for are, again, the gray here is same day bookings, and then the light green is within the next week. So we are seeing that those bookings, they have also reduced compared to what they used to be, but not as much. I would say that that's probably half of what it used to be compared to the rest of it, which is like used to be a significant chunk, and now it's a pretty thin sliver here. So the two in these small amount of bookings that are still coming in, the two big trends are shorter lead times and longer length of stay. So from a pricing perspective, what we are recommending to all our customers, and even if you're not a customer, a lot of these can be done without using dynamic pricing. So you can go ahead and try and do that. Is one, set up an aggressive length of stay discount. So not too many people, there is almost no tourism right now, but what is happening is people trying to find a place to stay for a week, 2 weeks, a month, that are still coming in. So try and get a little ahead of the curve on that, and see if you can give a deeper length of stay discount to really, you might not make profits, but whatever costs that you might be bleeding, if you can cover some of that, then that's going to help rather than not having anything. The second one is last minute discounts. So given all the cancellations that have happened, inventory, there is way more inventory that's available than there is usually in the market. So, and given that people are booking for immediate travel, you might need to, you need to, again, decide what your flow rate is, below which it doesn't make sense to go. But once you have that flow rate, see if you, especially with last minute stays, you can give that discounts. What we are saying again here, why it is last minute, is I don't think anybody knows, but we are definitely not sure at this point what the demand for summer and fall is going to look like. So at this point, we are recommending most people to hold their rates for more than 2 months out, especially for two reasons. One, nobody is booking anyways. And two, once travel comes back, and again, we don't know how far out, but once it comes back, if there is a surge, then you'll be in a position, you'll not have to play catch up and say, hey, we discounted the entire year and now we are getting cheap bookings. But once you start seeing some bookings come in, or if you start monitoring some and I'll show you some tools to monitor how you can see when demand is beginning to pick up, then you can say, okay, it looks like it's picking back up, but maybe I'm not getting bookings. So maybe the demand is softer. At that point, you can then go and say, okay, let's try and give discounts to also get summer and fall bookings if the demand isn't back to its normal pace. The next one is flexible cancellation policies. Again, there are very few people booking last minute stays, far out stays, but there is a thin sliver. And what that means is, it could be two things actually. It could be people who are rebooking their stays that were going to happen in May on to sometime later. It could also be really new bookings for people who think there might be some optimists out there who say, hey, I think by September this might be fine. But regardless of who's booking, at this point, it might be useful to allow flexible cancellation policies. Nobody knows if they are going to be able to travel or not. So people will shy away from booking something that doesn't allow for free cancellations, for example. So if you can get a booking that, even though like by September, maybe this situation hasn't resolved and people have to cancel at that point, but at least you'll have something on the books. Like, they'll eventually cancel anyways if travel can't be done, but then at least for now, you'll have something on the books that way. The last one is fewer restrictions, and this is talking about minimum stays, where yes, there are long bookings coming in, but there are also some short bookings coming in. And at this point, given how much inventory is out there, and really given that people are mostly booking last minute, it makes all the sense to allow shorter bookings in the next week or two. What that does is, if you do get a short booking, because it's mostly going to be last minute in the next week or two, it will get over soon. So your calendar is still going to be open for a longer stay later on. But then farther out, you can keep the minimum stays a little longer to be able to cover or try and get those longer bookings on your calendar. So these are sort of broad recommendations. If you have any questions, you can always send to me. But what I wanted to cover after this was some data. And if you go to our Price Labs landing page, you'll see a COVID-19 tab up there. And if you go click on US states, what you'll see is similar to the data I showed for the entire world. We've created a dashboard where we are updating data daily. So you can select New York, for example, in this case, and you'll be able to see 4 different charts. And I would encourage people to look at this to be able to find out when demand is getting back to picking up, even if it's not getting back to its full potential. So the first chart, what you see here is, again, how many new bookings are coming in. And what we are seeing is off late, compared to the first week of March, new bookings are down 70%. And first week of March was already a little bit down from February. So this 70%, 67% down is probably going to be a little more. But what you want to track here is when this bar starts growing back a little more. That's when you know that, okay, there is some activity beginning to happen in your state. We are trying to see if we can get this data available at a more localized level as well. So you can select your address and a region around it, and we can send an update on that. The second chart is, again, I've selected New York here, is showing what kind of occupancy trends are we seeing. The green here is what kind of new bookings that we are estimating that are coming in. And the red is what kind of cancellations we are seeing in. So the occupancy here, it looks like plenty of people are still booked for Memorial Day. They might eventually end up canceling. They just haven't canceled yet. So if cancellations end up happening, then this will slowly come down. And if you look at the red line here, it's a small line, but it's showing that some people have started in the last week. So the bottom 2 lines are showing activity that has happened in the last week. It's showing that in the last week, people have started canceling their stays pretty much throughout May. The next chart is, again, looking at lead time changes. So it used to be that 20% of the stays in New York used to be less than within the next 2 days. That has ballooned up to almost more than half the stays. So not nobody. There are still people who are booking a little farther out, but that ratio has really changed. A lot more people are now booking shorter last minute stays. A lot of these bookings that are happening super far out might also be people who think that maybe in a year's time things will improve, or not in a year's time, but maybe in 6 months things will improve. But also people who are rebooking their stays if the stays have not been canceled by the OTA already. The last one is looking at, again, the length of stay trends. And on that one, we are generally not seeing that big a shift. If you look at the overall mix, the shift that is there, a very minor one, is the purple here, which is 14 to 30-day stays. Those seem to be increasing. So they're up to 11% of all bookings now. Keep in mind that these are bookings made. So one booking that is 14 to 30 days long, in terms of occupancy, is equivalent to 14 bookings that are 1 day long. So this is a little misleading from that perspective. If you think in terms of occupancy, the top will occupy a lot bigger proportion. But this is looking just purely based on number of bookings and not in terms of occupancy. So with that in mind, yeah, I mean, this is what I wanted to share. If you want, you can keep track of whichever, I mean, all of you are probably in New York, but if you have listings in any other state, you can keep track of those as well. Just to be able to proactively be seeing how's demand shaping up in your market.
Awesome. Thanks, Anurag. Really appreciate it. And we'll move over to the question section now. We will send out the link to this section of the Price Labs website so that everyone can go and put in their local area and and they'll be able to see what the data trends say there. So a question that someone emailed ahead of time before this event, I saw some similar questions in the chat, regarding the EIDL application. As a host with only one employee, how do I figure out what to put for the following? Business and legal name, trade name, should I choose a sole proprietorship or individual contractor? And the final part of the question is, how would one calculate cost of goods sold? So Mike, if you want to take this one.
Sure. Again, and I'll preface with, you know, some of the more accounting type questions like cost of goods sold. You want to talk with your accountant depending on how you filed your business tax returns. So I think for this particular question, if you've incorporated as an LLC or a partnership, then obviously you should use the legal incorporation name as your business legal entity. I think the trade name there is actually optional. I don't think you actually have to put it in there, but you can, and it could be just the branding that you use for your business. But again, I think that's an optional one. And this is the tricky one: the sole proprietorship versus individual contractor. It really depends on how you're receiving the tax filing for your revenue. So for Airbnb specifically, you're getting if you have $20,000 of payments and you're getting and you have more than X number of reservations, you get that 1099. And depending on how you structure your business, if you've kept everything separate and you have a business checking account in your name and you kind of keep everything separate, then you can probably apply as a sole proprietor. But if you're getting kind of everything as the individual contractor, if you're getting your income as through a 1099 miscellaneous, then you're probably more as an individual contractor. So I think it's really kind of depending on the facts and circumstances of your situation. But I will say that, like, if it were me, I would probably just do a sole proprietorship because I can apply 7 days. I can apply on April 3rd versus April 10th. And then submit all your documents. If you can get through as a sole proprietor, great. If not, then you check, and then you resubmit your application, your SBA application, and you check the individual contractor box. But as long as you have everything else listed properly, I think there's enough ambiguity there that you can say that, like, it was a kind of a good faith. You kind of made the determination in good faith, and if they tell you that it's wrong, then you can just resubmit it. But and make sure, obviously, all your payroll records and everything else aligns appropriately.
Got it. And a follow-up question on that, Mike, about PPP. I'm an independent Airbnb owner. I don't have any employees. Can I still apply for PPP?
Yeah, you can, right? You can apply as a self-employed individual, right? So the business, your business net income will be your self-employment income. So if you take that number and then you divide that by 12, multiply by 2.5, that is the PPP amount that that you would be eligible for. But again, making sure that you filed appropriately for your 2018 taxes. Like you'll need your 2018 or 2019 taxes to be able to qualify. So making sure that you have your Schedule C or however you do your taxes, that's going to be kind of the key determinant there to be able to qualify for this funding. Because you're going to, again, it kind of goes back to the documentation. You need to have all your documents done. So if you have a W-2, then making sure that you talk to your accountant, you have your W-3, you have your 641, you have your 941. You have all these documents ready so that when you get the call from the banker, that you can email all the documents over to them and they can get it into their system as soon as possible. Because again, this is a first come first served type program, so it really favors the person that is prepared. So don't wait until you get the call, because then that's not going to be helpful. That's not going to be helpful for you.
And there's another question, Mike, that said, do you need to apply at your bank for both the EIDL and the PPP?
No. So they're actually two different things, right? So the PPP, they're both SBA programs. The PPP is basically the SBA. This thing of the SBA, they've outsourced that to the banks. So the banks are the ones collecting the information, they're processing everything, and then they input it into the SBA system, right? So you can apply for that. And then the EIDL is just the link. I think Nick posted that link. It's also in the presentation. You click on the COVID-19 relief.sba. It's literally, it should take you 5 minutes to fill out that form. I encourage everyone to do that as soon as possible. So that will make you eligible, or that will make you eligible and give yourself a place in line for the 10,000 or up to $10,000 advance. Again, that's $1,000 per employee. So if it's just you, then it's one. If you're self-employed, then it's one. If you're doing it with a partner or your spouse, it's two, and then any other W-2 employees you have. And I think I'll address the question about contractors. So contractors, if you read the guidance from Treasury, I know there's a lot of misinformation online, but if you read the final guidance from the Treasury Department, contractors do not count in payroll. They do not count in payroll. So if you're paying your cleaners, you're paying your US-based VAs, they would not factor in your payroll calculation. Anyone outside of US, they don't count. They by default do not count. So anyone that you have outside of US, they don't qualify for this program. And the logic is because independent contractors can also apply for PPP, right? So they can protect their own paycheck by applying for it. They don't need you to kind of protect their paycheck. That's why, and that's to avoid double dipping into this program.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Anurag, there's a couple of pricing questions here, so I'm going to switch the camera over to you. The pricing data that you showed earlier, is that available for the Colombia market? Looks like the country, Colombia.
Correct. So let me quickly share the screen to make this easier to answer. Yeah, so if you, again, go to the homepage, there's US state level data, and then there is global data available at a country level. So you'll be able to select Colombia there, and you can see that. Okay,
great. And a follow-up question is, does Price Labs use AI for pricing? Or I guess like the larger question is how do you guys determine pricing normally?
Right, so normally it depends on a mix of the data that we get from the market by scanning different OTAs and a set of rules that each owner can set. So we look at historic seasonality, we look at day of week fluctuations, and we also look at future looking data, which is what you're seeing here actually, to understand, hey, what future dates are seeing a spike in demand, to be able to understand when there might be an event happening or a holiday coming up, and automatically raise rates for that. The other set of things that we apply are settings that each user can sort of choose in some ways based on, so each listing is different, each manager is different, everybody has different needs, and we don't have one answer that will satisfy everybody in New York, right? So what we do is we provide a lot of database stuff, but then you can layer in your own rules on top of it based on what you're comfortable with. So for example, one of the settings we started out about 2 weeks back is actually named coronavirus, which essentially says, if your calendar is completely empty, then we are going to give a deep discount. But if you're still getting well booked, then you're not going to be discounted. So we are not telling everyone to just drop prices without reason. We're saying, hey, if you're getting booked, then there is no reason to drop prices. But if most of our customers have seen that, yeah, I mean, with bookings dropping, there is a lot more vacancy. So in that case, it will try and drop rates. Again, it's only going out to, aggressive ones are going out next 15 days. And then after 60 days, we are not making any adjustments. So whatever the market-based rates are, those are going to apply. And the market-based rates, again, you can still choose the minimum prices for each season and all that stuff. So it's not going to fluctuate beyond what you have set up your parameters to be.
Awesome. Thanks, Anurag. Mike, there was a question here about if you can still apply for PPP if you have if your short-term rental income comes on your Schedule E and is not self-employment income.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one is that one's fairly straightforward. If you're not Schedule E, you're not a business. So if you're not a business, then if you're just collecting rental income, then from everything I've seen, you're not going to qualify for the PPP program. Because you're not self-employed, you're not a sole proprietor, and you're obviously not incorporated. I think I saw like 2 questions. There are 2 separate questions on that.
Yeah.
So I think that's, yeah, I think that's, you are unlikely to qualify for that. There's a question about, sorry, go ahead.
Saying there's a question here about LLC owners counted as employees for PPP. So we kind of covered that with one owner, but I guess in the case of multiple owners, and I guess they're splitting profits instead of getting paid on W-2. Like, how would that be counted as an employee, or how would that be factored in?
That I'm not qualified to answer that question. I mean, I would think it kind of goes back to who's the active manager, like who are the active managers on there, and who are just the limited partners. But I think that's probably more facts and circumstances type question.
Got it. Here's another interesting one. Are there any repercussions for applying for SBA/PPP loans? I guess that means EIDL/PPP or PPP, while also applying for unemployment.
Yeah, I've seen that quite a bit actually. I haven't seen any repercussions on that, right? Because if you're applying for these loans, you are, for the PPP loans specifically, you're replacing the paychecks of your W-2 employees, right? I think the question probably falls down to if you're using the EIDL income, if you're using the EIDL loans, or the PPP loans, excuse me, to cover your paycheck, and then if you apply for unemployment, are you double dipping there? I don't think the question, I haven't seen any specific guidance based on that, but what I will say is that, if you're the loan that's forgiven, it's probably going to be counted as income to you, right? And then obviously you'll need to report that on your personal tax returns. And then if the Department of Labor for New York, for example, comes back to you after they kind of go through this initial surge of applications and ask if you've received any compensation for the year, I think that's up to you. Then you'll need to disclose that you have received this as this loan which was forgiven as part of your paycheck, and that's as part of your wage income, excuse me. So which logically would say that you would have to pay back those unemployment benefits. But again, that's just me speculating. I haven't seen any specific guidance on that. There's nothing in New York, at least for anything regarding the PPP loan and applying for unemployment. But one interesting note there is that with the CARES Act, with COVID, you are qualified. Self-employed and contractors are eligible for unemployment under their DUA program. So you get the $600 per month. So that's outside the state programs. So that has specific rules as well that haven't been really fleshed out versus the loan. So it's hard to say. What I would say is just apply for everything, get it. When you file your taxes, file it appropriately. If you get questions from the Department of Labor, obviously just be very transparent on all the funds that you've received and how they've been applied to. And then to the extent that you have to return the money, then you have to return the money.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So that kind of addressed, there was a question here about applying for unemployment if your income comes from short-term rentals. I know there's, if you look up the pandemic unemployment program, right? I believe, Mike, there's something on the Department of Labor website that has a checklist to see if you would meet those requirements, and it has instructions on how to apply. Mike, did you see any other questions on here? I've kind of been scanning through that we should answer.
I'm looking. Yeah, if you pay your workers in cash, can you file for a PPP? If you're paying them in cash, if you provide a 1099 to them, they would be able to apply for a PPP. You would not be able to apply on their behalf. So that's the answer to that question. There's one question about, has anyone received a 10K advance? I haven't, and I've kind of been pretty diligent on checking on Reddit and Twitter and everything else. I haven't seen anyone actually get their advance yet. I presume that this is because that program is being administered by the SBA directly, and it's a small agency, and they're probably just digging out from underneath all the applications to be able to fund some of these loans. Can you set up an LLC now and apply for? I see a question about, can you apply for an LLC now and apply? Sorry, can you set up an LLC now and apply for a PPP loan? Most of the national banks, you can't. They will only allow you to apply if you have a deposit account with them prior to February 15th. That's kind of the cutoff I've seen. So I think the answer would be no there. And I think a lot of these programs are set up if you need to show payroll for the last 12 months. So if you aren't set up that way, probably not worthwhile to do that. I don't know if you see any other questions there. I think that's
there's one question about, is there a point of applying for these loans if I'm the only employee? It sounds like the answer was yes from what we talked about before.
Yeah, it would be, if you're filing as an LLC, then that profit to you is your paycheck effectively. So you would be able to apply for PPP for that. But again, everyone should definitely apply for EID, no matter kind of what your situation. If you incorporate it as a business, you're sole proprietor. I think there's a question. I saw something on sole proprietor as well. You don't need an EIN to be a sole proprietor. You can use your social security number as the sole proprietor. I think really the key difference there is how you set up your business. Are you doing everything separately in a separate business account where all your expenses and income are segregated? I think that's probably like a pretty important test on if you can be a sole proprietor versus an individual contractor. Excuse me.
Got it. Mike, I actually had a question. If you own multiple businesses, can you apply for the EIDL advance for the two companies that you own?
Yeah, I have two businesses too. I applied for both.
Okay.
I haven't heard back yet. So, but as long, and it goes back to the question about can foreign, if you're not a U.S. citizen, can you apply for these? You have to put on your social security number. If you're the principal owner for these LLCs, or if you're doing it as a sole prop, you have to put your social security number on there. And obviously, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you don't have one. And I think if you don't have one on there, you're unlikely to get funded. I saw that question there. But in the SBA application too, there's a specific question on there to ask: are you an owner or manager of other related businesses that are applying for PPP? And asking you to attach another page. So if you have multiple businesses and you're applying for both, make sure that you add the business name, the EIN number for the other businesses that you're applying for, so that you don't get tripped up on the rules later on. I think the guidance here is just to be as transparent with everything, just because the rules are so in flux. Just make sure that you disclose everything on the applications, and you send everything to the SBA and to the banks, so they can't come back to you and say that you're trying to hide the ball on them. That like, hey, look, I gave you everything, I disclosed everything. This is the situation. If you've made a mistake, we can return the money. But you just don't want to be in a situation where they can come back to you and say that you should have sent me this, but you didn't.
Got it. And I think we did answer this question, but a couple people have chimed in again real quick. So if your rental income from your Airbnb comes down on Schedule E, it sounds like you can't apply for the PPP, but they should still apply for the can and probably should still apply for the EIDL. Is that?
Yeah, I think if you're a homeowner, then there's a separate. Yeah, you can apply for this part. I haven't spent that much time in, so please double check this. But my understanding is that EIDL loan you can apply even if you're not a business, because there's a homeowner part of that as well, that you suffer damages as a homeowner. So if obviously if you're doing on a Schedule E, you own these properties. So I think that's another way for you to potentially apply for the program there. So you can do that for the advanced, and you can do that for the larger EIDL program, which, there's probably like 5 or 6 forms. It took me about an hour to get through it. But that loan is not forgivable, 2, just a lot more intrusive into kind of all your financial affairs. So they're going to look at you holistically as a person, like how much assets do you have, can you repay the loan? So it's more of a traditional underwrite versus the PPP loan really is more of a grant disguised as a loan.
Awesome. Okay, guys, I'm seeing like a lot of questions that are really individual specific coming in. If you guys want, we're pretty much out of time. You can post those in the Facebook group. But I think as Mike said, like everyone's situation is a little bit different. So you may need to speak to your accountant about some of these questions. These loans sound pretty complicated. So with that, the only other thing I asked before we wrap up this call, first of all, I want to say thank you, Mike and Anurag. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to put this together. Also, if anyone has any topics they would like covered at future meetups, if you could just put that in the chat box, it'd be very helpful. We're trying to do one of these every week, and we're trying to bring in speakers that cover topics that you guys are interested in. So just throw that in the chat box, and we will make sure to book those speakers if we can for future weeks. So again, Mike and Anurag, thank you very much, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.